One of the biggest roadblocks to growing the Maine economy is the skyrocketing cost of housing. Some even call it a crisis. And it's easy to understand why. Everyone wants to be here in Maine. But if we're going to grow in a way that helps and doesn't hurt, there's one simple thing we need. We need to build more houses. This week, we're talking to Matt Marks, a longtime advocate for Maine's construction industry, who's been at the center of the housing crisis debate from the get-go. Matt and I will dig into the core problems with Maine's construction and housing markets. We'll talk about the friction that holds us back from keeping pace with demand. And as always, we'll talk about solutions that might drive those costs down and help our economy grow. I'm Jonathan Bush, and this is Maine for Keeps. Matt, in SoPo, growing up, were you a, kind of a star?
Not a star, but blue collar family. Dad was a fireman. Mom worked in finance. Yeah, a lot of fun. I mean, it was a great little blue collar city and changed a lot. But played sports. Love my neighborhood. Was a tight knit group of kids and ran around, and parents worked, and we did all the things kids did then. It was a different time.
Did you? Because you did well.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, that was very sweet of you to be so aw shucks. This is the Trump era. You're supposed to say, I was amazing. No. You were. No. Did you need to leave Maine at that point?
Felt like it. I felt like it. I can be honest.
The thing I run into these people who were at the top of their class or the top of their team, and then their next job is not in Maine.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was the only one to go to college. It was sort of a new thing. He did it as an adult later in life. Most of my family, my dad's family, Pittsburgh born, that side of the country where they worked, hard labor. And, so it was a new thing to strive to go to college and sort of get out. But I think, I think a lot of, the most advice I got from people who are successful here was to get out of Maine, earn a buck and come back home. And
you want to raise your kids here. You want to be here, but you're not really going to do the whole American dream, the part where you rise up here. So where'd you go and when did you come back and what was your hook?
I didn't do it. I stayed, and that's the funny part.
Hoorah!
Yeah, I dug in, and I beat myself up about it for a long time. I thought to myself, was this the right idea? Should I have done this? Should I, but again, it was a time too when, the college was not always the first choice for everybody. It was just starting to be. So, a lot of my friends went right to work. I worked 3 jobs. I worked on a farm. I worked in a warehouse. I delivered newspapers. Like I did all that stuff, even out of high school. And I thought to myself, like, can I do this and go to the university here and still build a career and push back? And the truth is, you got to really sink your mind into it. It wasn't easy. It was rough, but you can do it. It's just, boy, you watching people go away and, that come back later, a lot of friends did that. And I'm not guessing. I mean, I just assume that it probably was a little easier pathway, maybe.
Right. Drive out in a rusty Corolla and come back in a Beamer and you're like,
yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I should have done that.
So how did you get into the contracting world of Maine? Were you doing it right in as a kid and then kind of followed the food chain, or what got you across into the world of building in Maine, or not building as the case may be?
Big accident, sort of the convergence of contracting and politics happened around the same time. My dad was a firefighter, and he kicked me over to work a couple political campaigns. He volunteered his son, I guess you'd say. And so I did that.
I think they say.
Voluntold, yeah. And I started to meet people. And when I finished college, I took a job working corporate in the finance side of the fuel industry. And liked it, but it wasn't for me. I just felt like, part of the reason I think I stayed in Maine is I like being outdoors. I like that integration of more the gritty side of the business, and met a local city councilor who was running for city council, who was in the construction industry and needs some help at a business where they had a heavy hauling oil business and construction and development firm, and jumped in with both feet. I was like, well, this is a great blend. I mean, this has got everything I want.
Got it. So first of all, little aside, since it'll be stuck in my head, the fuel business, did it involve all the tanks in SoPo?
It did.
So you were like, what's big around here? And you look at me like, that's big.
Yeah. And the funny part is, Jonathan,
Did you notice how many of them were empty?
well, the irony was when I was a kid, we loved those fuel tanks, and I'll tell you, it's sort of a history there. Like it was a stone's throw from my house, right? So we all trek up, and we would be savvy enough to
Which
find.
one, is it the Sprague ones or the Bug Light ones?
No. So the Portland pipeline, and it's so North Hill Street there, and I lived over in that little neighborhood near Amados that those little houses they built for the shipyard builders back in the day. And me and my buddies would go up there with our hockey skates and hockey sticks and find that one piece of water that we could turn into a hockey pond in the winter. And years later, I ended up in the fuel business. It was funny, you don't load over there at Portland Pipeline. We were over at Sprague and at Irving and all those other companies, but I never thought I'd end up in that business, and I was like, well, this is pretty cool. This has gone full circle. I went from trying to sneak onto the property to play some hockey to now be having a card to get in the gate.
I like it. So you actually kind of came in a little bit more politics than contracting, and then you said, all right, let me help the contractors build. Did you have other industry categories that you were in before you got into the contracting as your kind of sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, I worked a lot of different jobs. I mean, I think that's sort of one of the things you learn here in Maine if you're trying to make it. My goal is to buy a house. I want to buy a house really young, and so I did anything I could. So if anybody needed help, I was in, and that aggressiveness probably led me to being sort of a jack of all trades at things. And when I landed at this suite of family businesses that had all these different, I was glowing. There was a family that said, we need help. If you're in, you're in, and I just took anything I could to jump into, from, how do we fix the maintenance fleet so we're doing it right? How do we schedule things better? The technology piece, like I just ate that stuff up. And it was that blended with the politics, because everything we did had
every project is like, oh, you're not allowed to do that.
Everything. I mean, and it was like amazing to me to see, like, wait a minute, I got these two worlds colliding here.
Yeah.
How does that work?
I'll never forget that you thanks to you, I had the most vivid capture of the collision of those worlds at Gorham's Sand and Gravel. I think I binge ate absentmindedly about 8 pieces of pizza, listening to these stories. The story of the job site with 3 guys on it and 6 inspectors, because it was like a federal off ramp from a federal highway to a state highway that then had a town road on it. And so all the inspectors from all this, different constituencies to this one, whatever it was, I don't know, cul-de-sac, cloverleaf, had to be inspecting these 3 guys driving 3 machines around. Oh my Lord.
Those stories are numerous, and they're hard to get. What I think the niche I found was to be able to take a story like that and then be able to share that with the people writing policy and say, like, we've gone wrong here. This is wrong. We can all agree that there's a problem.
Yeah, nobody's proud of that.
No,
I don't think the 6 inspectors are like, we're killing it today.
No, and that's sort of the niche I found pretty quickly, is that where we could solve those things, great. But again, most of the work in my early days was just trying to move things along, move things ahead, trying to get through those barriers.
Just break stuff down and fix them. Yeah.
Yeah. Licenses.
So let's pan back on this. You're in this space now. Before we get into, I jumped into sort of the wall of shame moment there with the 3, and there was the other one when what was it? The guy wanted to have his son be an intern. And it was like, well, if you want to be an intern, you got to have a signature from the superintendent of the school district. What? And if you want to, the superintendent, if he's going to sign it, you got to make sure that he's not going to be around any heavy equipment. I'm like, Gorham Sand and Gravel's not going to. I mean, anyway, but before we get there, like, there's good news in the construction world in Maine, at least from the perspective of demand, right?
Demands to the roof. And I people keep talking about it. I mean, I think back to 2009 when I jumped from that family business over to association work. It was I had like really bad time. I used to joke about it. I said, I went to oil business, and the oil business sort of collapsed. We had that price spike, and I jumped in the construction industry, and then that collapsed. And I was talking to a group of engineers, and they yelled out, "Don't become an engineer." And I was started laughing. I was like, no, that's not going to happen. But yeah, so that industry, is really fickle. I always say it's always on the edge. No matter how good it is, it's on the edge. It doesn't take a lot of changes to have it really good year or really bad year. And
Yeah.
and that's the tough part,
They're
because
carrying a huge amount of capital,
huge.
and they aren't in charge of whether they work, or at least not completely in charge, right? Aside from getting the contract, each stage you need a permit, you need permission, you need clearance to keep going. And that makes it very hard for them to control their destiny, it seems.
It is, and you've got the fluctuation between what they want to do in private work, which is, the sweet spot. When private work is thriving, that industry is solid. When private has any relaxation to it at all, even a little bit, and specifically in some markets, like there's some when we have market growth that's not diversified, and it's just, for a while, you remember it was retail. Retail was huge. These box stores, big deal. You could see the
Goddamn Jeff Bezos.
yeah, you could see the bubble, right? And so, that's the stuff that always scared us. And you look at that, but we had like back then we had 30,000 employees in the 2008, 2009, and then that collapse happened. We lost 10,000 construction workers then. 10,000. And I used to tell people, like, not only is this devastating, we lost all the knowledge because you've got to think with the aging population of construction, that they're not there to train that next generation either. So
Does that where are we today with that? So if one thing you've got is demand off the charts relative to what's supply on the workforce side, like how many people are in and how many people want to be in, and how hard is it to get in to the trades, to construction in Maine today?
yeah, it's a great question. It's better today than it was even a few years ago. And I will say, like, so we're back to that. We're actually exceeded. We're at like 32,000 construction workers. It's a great sign. It's probably the highest we've been that I can think of. What is interesting, we had a shift, so a cultural shift. So we, back years ago, nationally, they eliminated the intro to construction in school. So your 7th or 8th grade class usually did like a technology class where they learned how to make a birdhouse or whatever it is. Those got wiped out. So that and home ec just gone off the map. That had a real factor in people just having that exposure to something different. And that lasted a long time. And so we fought really hard. I think in Maine, in a unique way, you've got this real push for college preparatory classes. Now, I've said for a long time, like, those shouldn't be working against each other. You can still be in the college prep classes and go into a field, a blue collar position. Those skills are great.
100%.
Yeah, you just don't have to be a kid that goes to tech school. So I think that happened. That change has started to happen. And the association I used to work for has set up an apprenticeship program that it has been tremendous. I mean, they're in over 16 schools, and they're doing basically like a construction boot camp. We came up with this to say, how do we change it? And schools at first, I didn't know how schools were going to react. When I first started meeting with them, I think I visited 34 schools in Maine, 34 school districts, and they were like, yeah, like this is how much you can earn. This is what your benefits look like. And the teachers there were coming up to me and saying, like, I should do that. I'm like, well, yeah, you can, but tell the kids in the class. So that shift has been a game changer. They're putting a lot more kids through apprenticeship. We were well over a couple hundred last year. and that's making a change.
So large workforce, large demand, squeals of agony. What's going on here? There's demand, there's interest. Why so much pain and why so few buildings?
Yep. Well, Maine's unique. Boy, I've been through a lot of big projects here, and you sort of scratch your head. You've got two different things here. You've got the regulatory process, which is we can talk about, and then you've got the I don't want that built here. And it used to
There's
be
more of like a NIMBY thing or environmental thing or both. What's the
NIMBY, often driven by environmental advocates that find a revenue.
or NIMBY throwing out the e-card so they don't have to say, yeah.
And that has it used to be that those were reserved for sort of like really big projects. You might hear some squabble about your neighbor building something, but generally speaking, it was those big projects. Today, pretty small projects, so small housing projects, small commercial investment gets attention like it never has before, and that part is really hard because it's more emotional. But the first time I remember really seeing that was a NGO bringing in busloads of people to a community decision on a project, and I had to scratch my head. I'm like, where are these people coming from, and
why do they care?
I don't know. I mean, and I think for the NGO,
one of the things that I feel like the jury is out on this. I mean, the jury is back, and the data is clear that actually higher density construction projects are lower environmental impact per person than lower density ones. And yet there seems to be more environmental squabble about higher density projects than low density ones.
Yeah, and this is not honest. They're not being honest. And I think, the reality is that the municipalities, individually are trying to save or protect something that was there. But the truth is, we've got to look at density. We've got to look at the height requirements. We have to understand that if you want people to work in your restaurants and bring you that $45 steak dinner and your martini or whatever you're drinking that night, they've got to have a place to live.
Locally raised martini, locally grown martini that had therapy while it was being martinized. Yeah. Someone's going to bring you that, and they can't afford a place unless they get in line. And
it's not right. And I think that part of it, that reality of it, isn't a debate over a particular building. Like if you polled everybody, be like, yeah, we need more affordable housing. I mean, it's the number one.
Just not here.
Just not right here. I don't want it down the street for me.
Yeah. I mean, SoPo. And this is I'm gonna flick your. Probably you're gonna have a NIMBY reaction to me because you have that beautiful childhood neighborhood in your memory, but there are those empty tanks. And every time I see them, I see glass, skyrise, incredible live, work, play with drone ferries going back and forth to DeMillo's. I mean, we could kill the world with development in SoPo. Everybody would win. It's empty tanks. What do you think stops these things from happening?
Well, I think South Portland in particular, the resistance to any development is just is evident in what's happening too with their taxes. They've prohibited the Portland pipeline from bringing fuel in from Canada, so they've got a weird situation there, right?
And literally, the pipeline is there.
It's there. It's built. It's their property. And it's changed that whole dynamic of that city. And then you've got the circumstances out at the retail outlets like the mall in that area. And so, everybody there is struggling. You've got people that I know live there forever that, they're getting the tax bill now. And they're going, oh, I mean, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And the development part of it is ridiculous.
I'm confused because I would think that if you grew high density, therefore low impact per person housing, your property tax per SoPoian would go down. You don't need another fire department. You don't need another police department. You don't need another school. You might need more. You might need to grow the school someday, but you don't need another superintendent. I mean, the fixed cost doesn't move. The variable cost, therefore, gets, spread over. The fixed cost gets spread over more people. And so you only add the variable cost and everybody's taxes go down.
Exactly, but you've got to find a willing developer that wants to go through the hurdles and the aggravation of getting a project permitted there.
So talk to me about this. What are the biggest blockers to development that you guys run into? Because you work with the builders, but they must relate to the developers or the absence of them.
Yeah, I mean, I work across the board. I work with the contractors and developers, and the part now that has become sort of a death by a thousand cuts, the amount of regulations that have fallen on that industry, and so it's raised costs substantially, and it's lengthened the timeline to get a project done. Which every time that happens, you're paying architects, attorneys, your finance team, all that money before you even know if you've got a project greenlit, and it's it's so many regulations that you have to comply with. They've come up with these really restrictive work windows, times the year you can actually do certain tasks. And that ranges from everything from being in the water, so you don't harm fish, to watching out for bats, because you don't want to destroy bat habitat. Those windows have become so restrictive that even if we had another dozen construction companies, they can only do so much work during that particular season. And so that's part of it. On top of that, and I know the DEP is working on this, but we know we've got 700 plus applications in for the Land Bureau to push through permits. That's a lot of permits just sitting there.
Wasn't it she who said that she no longer, was it a recent announcement? She doesn't know how far behind she is anymore? Like they've lost the ticket control or whatever on the backlog?
I didn't catch that. I did meet with them recently. They've agreed now to use third-party reviewers, which I think is a smart move. And kudos to her. I actually believe she wants to get that. She wants to get this fixed. However, it's DEP takes the brunt of it, but it's not necessarily DEP. You've got all the other agencies that have to give her feedback about how they feel about a particular project. And so, where is the hang up? I think that's what we're trying to figure out. But look, I mean, that's money on the table. That's
Have you ever seen a state that says, go to my website, take out your permit, no review by me, but here are the rules. Now I'm going to inspect you whenever I want, but you don't have to wait. Has anyone done retrospective review as opposed to prospective?
So Maine had tried to create these rules. Though this is funny because it's appropriate right now. Maine has gone through several rulemakings in the past few years where they came up with this permit by rule. It's a very expedited process. You basically comply with the rules they set forward and you get your permit. The problem with it is they set the bar so high.
But maybe that's the steel thread through the, maybe what we do now is we kind of burrow that out a little bit. So we expand the number that go through. Has any gone through at all with that?
Oh yeah. In fact, one of the problems, I think the difference between like the development community and construction is when you're trying to get your permit, you want the permit. So you may concede to some of those things. Your construction folks on the other side, or when they get the project, they're like, whoa, time out. Like we can't do all that in a period of 3 months. Like that doesn't physically work. And so people use it. They also afterwards are sometimes looking for some relief from it. And sometimes you can get that, sometimes you can't. So that's the challenge there.
Okay. So there's this idea of kind of delegate and inspect. And with a very, very narrow definition, we have started that. And a few things trickle through that. What are other things that can break the back of this backlog that you've seen elsewhere that we just can't seem to get ourselves to do here in Maine?
Well, I think the second part of it, you've got the sort of the state level permitting. We push the feds and the Army Corps side, and then you have local. And I think the local review process is just as onerous, and that's the tough part about it. The state has pushed some of the rules onto the local municipality to enforce and adopt, including stuff like the building code. Those things are difficult as well. But I also think I've always said this when it comes to these issues. There's a relationship issue, like almost how do we talk to each other kind of deal. Like some of these things get hung up just on the personality that it's, developer versus inspector or town, or state. And that piece of it where that communication breakdown happens is probably one of the barriers that is the most ridiculous, because the people affected by that are yes, the developer, yes, the contractor, but it's the end user. It's that homeowner.
Is there an unconscious sort of a cultural assumption that among the regulators that you've worked with, that their job is kind of to beat back the contractor, that the contractor somehow?
There are some communities more than others. There are some where that's tougher, and there are some where it's a lot easier to work with. So it really depends. But yeah, there is that. We've said that for a long time, and we try to break those barriers down. In fact, we used to have this joint meeting with a construction specifications institute, and we would sit down and basically do like this whole complaint session with them and say, like, just get it out on the table. And it was therapeutic to some degree, but I think out of that, people realize, like, boy, we're a lot more similar. We're in the same industry. So
What about environmental restrictions in Maine versus other states?
well, we're tough here. I mean, if they probably 10 or 15 years ago, Maine was sort of got a lot of national attention of like that last frontier sort of status by national environmental groups, and money poured in. I mean, just poured in. And we saw things like Plum Creek and people protesting, chaining themselves to construction equipment. And it was like, wait a minute, where are we here? This is Maine, there's nothing like a logging truck driving up the road all the time. And now you've got somebody chained to the bottom of it. So when that started to happen, the environmental regs are almost difficult to keep up with. There's one this month, last month, they wanted to stop or reduce the use of using stone and seawalls to protect against these storms we've been having, and switch it over to Christmas trees wrapped in basically wire instead. And, of course, the engineering community is like, what? Like that's not going to work. So, I mean, it's gotten to a point where sometimes yeah, insanity, right?
Well, I mean, it's sort of something you'd read about in The Onion, like the seawalls made with Christmas trees in order to reuse Santa's waste.
It's not going to work. I mean, we know it's not going to work. And who wants to install it?
Maybe it'll work, but the idea of somehow mandating it, that there should be seawalls not be allowed to be made out of stone, seems like a caricature of something.
Yeah, the funny thing is we always tell them, there are instances where you can integrate things like that. Like you could use Christmas trees and protect beaches. You can use Christmas trees or trees or logs, and you could reinforce a shoreline, but it can't be the only solution. I mean, that's reality, right?
Do followership, not jamming down the throat. Hey, I did my seawall with Christmas trees and I love it, and I'm doing another. You should try it. It was cheaper. And I feel like giving things away to people whenever I tie up my boat, or whatever it may be. Okay. There seems to be, is there a, I mean, I think most Mainers, if you'd say, do you want to be kind of a particularly environmental state? Most Mainers, both sides, I'll say, yeah, we kind of do. Like, this is natural resources. But I'm wondering whether the actual environmentalism of the environmental protest pencils out. Like on a sort of carbon footprint per capita, is it just the idea of capita? Because a high density housing environment is better for the environment if you just accept that the people are allowed to exist. If you have this idea that the people shouldn't be there, well, then I can't help you. But has that debate kind of been played out?
Well, the debate is ironic to me. I mean, we've got the state commissioner report by HRA, as you know, and we need 38,000 more homes in production. But I think last year the Maine State Housing Authority may have celebrated something like 700 units. Look, the reality is, like, we can say that we know that, like we know that the need is there. It is our biggest problem, but we're not taking seriously the impacts of the decisions we're making to make the cost of building that more, and to make it take longer. And that's the part that I'm like, if we're serious about this, let's get really serious about it. Let's actually tackle this and break it up.
There also seems to be an entanglement of kind of wealth redistribution policy with housing policy. it seems like a sort of there's a down low kind of grab some tax and give it to some people playbook wrapped up in housing where, and maybe you know it better than me, but isn't there a rule where if a town wants to do a high density housing project, automatically there's a housing authority involved and a certain percentage of the things have to be made affordable and given away by a housing authority. And you sort of add a Politburo if you want to add an apartment complex.
Well, I think one of the things that has been ironic over the last year is people started to realize that we need all housing. So not just affordable workforce.
And maybe the affordable one is the one that, you know, the guy left when he moved into the new one. I mean,
that's right. That's right. We've said it for a long time. You know, when you look at the housing policy in general, if you have like inclusionary zoning, which Portland does, and I know other cities are looking at it, and it scares me because, you know, it has.
What does that even mean? That's a key word for.
Well, I think one of the key things for the inclusionary zoning and the Green New Deal in its entirety in Portland is that, you know, the idea was that as they built housing, they would have this dedication to that affordable units. And the irony is that the parcel of land and the restrictions on the particular parcel have a return value that the developer has to be interested in meeting, right? So they have to know at the end of the day, this is what their earning expectations are. When you start trimming away at that, you start seeing some devalue of that investment. And so in a place like Portland, when you have set all these rules on top of the state rules, on top of the federal, what happens? You end up with instead these condos. You know, you're ending up with condos because they're like, we're not going to the rental market. You've got rent control. You've got all these other things there.
Yeah.
And, you know, we keep saying
condos or apartments masquerading as hotel rooms, right? I mean, a lot of those beautiful new places, they look like apartments, but you can only get them as a hotel because they don't want to get caught in the apartment tag.
They don't want to do it. And instead, that's what's hurt people. And I think, but statewide, look, we have so much land, like our asset here.
It's hilarious, right?
Yes.
The idea of like, oh, we don't want to ruin the quaintness of Maine. I'm like, we could 3x and be 1/5 the population density of Massachusetts. 3x. And we're talking about what are we going to do with 30,000 seats? Where are we going to put them? Oh my God. Are you kidding?
It's wild. It's wild. And I think, you know, like, I don't know what the, you know, we have these individual debates about it, but like Maine has that asset there, you know. And the other thing I've mentioned is, you know, the state also owns a lot of land. So we have this like benefit of saying like,
who cares who owns it? It's everywhere.
Yeah,
it's the best part about Maine.
Yeah, we could do it tomorrow if we want to make this happen. So, but, you know, again, you know, when you look at those reports, you go, okay, well, the report's great, but now what are we going to do here? You know,
well, let me ask you that. Let's go to that, right? Like, all right, king for a day. What's your first move? What is the biggest, darkest hole? And what is the short term? We'll go with short term first. If you have a medium or longer term, you can add it. But what is the first fix for someone who's been studying this as long as you have? If you had one wish
for housing right out of the gate, let's streamline the permitting process. Let's make that criteria simple. Let's get it out the door and let's get them through with permit in hand. It's by far the easiest thing, right?
Same day or same week permit mandate. Done. You've got this done. You met the minimum requirement. You permit in hand. We're not going to move on. You know, that to me is the big thing. The second thing is you could start looking at how we keep relying on sort of the public dollar investment. And I know there's attractiveness with the federal tax credit. I don't want to take that away. I think that program should be stronger, but private investment can also not only be competitive, but it can often be cheaper per unit, mainly because they don't have the other regulations on top of it. We got to get private investment here. So we've got to get a tax scenario that encourages private investment in housing. Yeah. And that's just, it's simple. It's not complicated. I love that.
Yeah.
Listen, if you want to keep being addicted to the feds, you know, and we don't want to waste Susan Collins, like she brings home the bacon, God bless her, but it does bog us down. Is there a way to create an unfettered, pure free market vein for housing, as opposed to this underlying assumption that every freaking house has to be somehow a housing project?
And let's reward those municipalities that embrace the same conditions, you know, like the city of Auburn. Let's reward
rev share for Yimbys.
Let's get them going. Let's turn on the spigot that makes it so they can meet their transportation needs. So if they've got expanding housing, we can help them with that. If they need more in school money, let's figure it out. Let's figure it out. I mean, that to me is that's the brass tacks here. Like, we can do the ADUs and we can argue about, can you build a mother-in-law
It
apartment? That's
feels
not
like
when
it's fine, it's great, but it's
it is great.
inconsequential against the number.
We got it. I mean, look, my kids, my daughter's in New Hampshire. She's going to nursing school. And do I expect her back here? I don't know. And how's she going to buy a house here? She's going to earn a lot as a nurse if she finishes the program.
We've got a Piscataqua Bridge episode of the Maine For Keeps podcast coming up with all the people who have just gone across the bridge waiting for Maine to be more tax friendly. We'll invite her to that episode. We're going to have a fire pit and a fellowship there. Try to get them across the bridge again. We'll include your daughter.
And when you look at the numbers, when we used to spend a lot of time on the education side, the number of kids who were in Maine schools and left after the first year, or the brain drain that they talked about, even the later 2000s of the kids who just left, you have to think to yourself, like, we need a shift here. Like, this we have to make it affordable. And now, you look at the recent report, and you've got to make in Cumberland, York County, you've got to be at $180,000 in household income to buy something here. Well, come on. I mean, I look back on my parents. My dad going to do that as a fireman. My mom as a finance person. Like, we would have been out of luck. We would have been back in Pittsburgh or somewhere else. There's no chance that was going to happen.
And there is the argument that supply and demand are correlated, and that if you increase the supply, you will meet more demand further down the price point. I'm just brainstorming here, but that does seem to be a thing that's held up in other markets. Looking forward, are there things, I have mine, but I want to hear yours, in construction that are unique to Maine that you're excited about? That are not, hey, let's be screwed up less, but like where we will win, where we are in for a real treat.
Yeah, I think so. I think Maine construction is unique in a couple ways. I've traveled the country meeting with other construction firms, with a lot with Maine companies, meeting with other construction firms. I mean, it's ironic, when you go to San Diego and they're talking about $1 billion projects, we're talking about $1 billion projects. But what Maine has that's so neat is two things. First, we're one of the first on the map to start this apprenticeship program for non-union firm. The other thing is, just regardless if you're union or non-union, the Maine has this hard work ethic, and I think that's still there. People talk about it and they're like, no, but when I hear a company that calls me up and they end up with a sewer break and it's 5:30 on a Friday, and you've got two young guys who are jumping in to tie that thing up to make sure that neighborhood runs, like Maine, there's something about Maine that.
Yeah. We had, I convinced a friend to bring his company to Maine, just his call center at the time. And it was a, you call the doctor and the doctor's office closed, and there's someone answering to Dr. Jones' office, and they page the doctor. They kind of triage your problem. So he moved that to Farmington because there were all those UMaine kids, like, great job, like between hours, after class, whatever. So, and he's like, Johnny, I don't know. Like, everybody gets buyer's remorse, right? You do the deal, you sign, and it's and then you suffer. And so he's at that courtyard on the other side, and I'm there with him. And he's like, it snows. It snows all night. He's from Nashville. He doesn't see any snow. And he's going, this is a disaster, John. What, and I don't know. Well, listen, it's long term. We're thinking long term here. My voice is going up as I try to make him relax, making him less and less relaxed. Anyway, we drive across down the hill, baseball field on the right, and you turn left in there, and there's this smoke coming out of looks like it's coming out of the roof of the house. Oh, Jesus. And it's on fire. Jesus. We pull in, and there's 75 cars. They're all there early because of the snow, and it's the exhaust from all the cars running while they wait for the job to open. I mean, it was one of those Maine pride moments. I was, oh, Gary, I remember him like, I remember that moment so vividly.
And that's the funny part, I used to laugh about it. There was, you're getting calls if you're in that industry, you're getting calls at 5 in the morning. I when I was in the industry, the owner of the company used to call me at 4:30. It wasn't uncommon, and he'd be up and ready to go. I mean, that's the difference here, I think, than some of the other places in the planet. Even the owner is dug in early in the morning. What's going on today? What do we got to do today? Like I haven't met an owner yet who's lounging on the beach here in the main construction industry and not taking that phone call. They're dug in. They want to make things happen. And that drive is absolutely huge in the Northeast. It's a cool factor. The other thing that I think you'd appreciate too is the use of technology. Like the main
Oh, that's
company.
where I was going to go. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, they're just on it. They're building newer and more efficient plants, everything from asphalt plants, concrete plants, I mean, and equipment. You watch a clearing today, and you've got equipment out there clearing trees, and it's done by remote control. The operator doesn't have to be in it. I mean, they are quick. The companies that are growing and successful are figuring out how to integrate that that maybe it helped us at that short term loss of employees there. I'm not saying it was a good thing, but it
Necessity is the mother of invention,
yeah,
Matt. You need a little necessity.
it spurred it. And I think that you're using 3D modeling to show buildings in advance and figure out what your problems are. I mean, all that stuff in Maine has accelerated. And the University of Maine, I give them a plug here for this. They've got a unique program. They responded to the industry. It's a construction management program, not an engineering program, a construction management program. And it's got an engineering base, but it's made for people who want to go out and do things. They want to be out there supervising a crew. They want to start the project and finish the project. And that system has just worked really well. In fact, they're always full. They turn away students because they have so many. I mean, it's amazing.
One of the things I tell people is, well, what should I go to school where I can, own a business or do a startup? And I said, it almost doesn't matter what you study. It's where you go with it. And going where there's a need and where you have a fever matters more than, whatever toolkit you got in high school or college. If you love the idea of building things, the appetite is there. You'll make more money than you will at Goldman Sachs if you go after it the same way. And especially now. And I think that especially if we deregulate or at least simplify the regulation so that it's a game that everyone can play the way in software, you can do anything you want. There's no committee, there's no town, there's no NIMBY who can sue you and shut you down. That if we get it so that there's a frontier there, there's just as much opportunity to make fortunes and own the American dream in construction. It brings me to one last thing where I'm always interested in the intersection of software and real work. I know software is real work, but actual hand-on material work. And that brings me to cross-laminated timber. Almost all the stuff in Europe is being built, whole hotels, skyscrapers, out of wood. We've got 6 million acres of wood. Why? Is this something to get excited about for us or just mad about? Or what? Where's the CLT in Maine?
It's amazing. We a few years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, we started talking about it here. There's a project in Portland that was done with affordable housing with CLT and celebrated. And I kept saying to him, like, they wanted me to get excited about it. I said, here's the deal. Until we're manufacturing that stuff, and I don't know why we're not trying to figure that out here in Maine, it's not a conversation. Let's do the real work first. Like, let's figure it out. We know it works. We understand. We can use it, but let's get it going. We have an opportunity to bring it direct to market from New England. Let's do it.
Well, that's an area we'll get to. I've got an architect coming who's a great environmentalist and maybe changing his tune a little as he watches a grinding halt come to residential housing. But the building codes of Maine don't lend themselves. You actually have to build a house around your CLT house to put all the wires in because you're not allowed to use the channels that CLT enables, which is a whole nother game. But I feel like that's an area where technology and our forest complex and these now empty pulp mills could get together with our trades. And we could be, I mean, not only could we speed up and deal with our own housing shortage, we could be exporting houses.
Absolute. It would be an absolute home run. And Maine has been, sort of the test case for some of this stuff in partnership with like the university. And I think changing the dynamic here where we can move that stuff into play is really the key. We get right there and then we just don't hit that home run. We get the triple. We don't get the home run. And I think that's the piece where, getting a group together to say, we're going to make this happen. We're going to find the investment. We're going to make it work no matter what. We're going to make it work is really going to be key to changing Maine. And quite frankly, that's the part that I've never really understood. We haven't taken our core businesses here, the forest industry, the fishing industry, and just really figured out how we build upon them. We're sending fish up to be processed north.
Totally.
We're processing lumber elsewhere. Like, let's figure that out.
Yeah.
Why are we giving
We're
away?
not a banana republic. We're not like, you don't come and scrape our natural resources and make money with it. We'll make the money. Thank you very much. I completely agree. Matt Marks, Cornerstone Government Affairs SOPO hero, stayed despite the economic cost to him. Thank you very much for joining the Maine For Keeps podcast, and I hope we do a lot more together.
You got it. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Maine For Keeps. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow us on social media, click and share with your friends, or get on to mainforkeeps.com. If you have ideas for new content or podcast guests, or if you'd like to give us some money to support the effort, be sure to click and send. We're at team@mainforkeeps.com, and I'm at jb@mainforkeeps.com. Thanks. See you soon.